7. Make thy money grow. The seventh law of wealth. Success in life comes not from holding a good hand, but by playing a poor hand well. Robert Louis Stevenson. Now that you have reached the final chapter of the wealth choice, you know that those men and women who have achieved both financial comfort and wealth are distinctly different from those who struggle paycheck to paycheck or who sink deeper into debt. Thanks in part to the research on which this audiobook is based, I can tell you precisely what compromises the difference between the roughly 112,000 African American households or the 35,000 black men and women who possess a net worth of $1 million or more, 0.01%, and the scores of Americans, black and white, who struggle to pay their bills. First, they differ in their attitudes, behaviors, personalities, and goals. In short, the 0.01% are driven. They are deeply passionate about what they do. It's as if their chosen field of work or endeavor is a calling, not a career. Second, they have a certain quiet inner peace regarding their ability to meet any challenge, to rise above any situation or circumstance. They are overcomers. Though the overwhelming majority did not experience an easy path, black millionaires are nonetheless more optimistic and infinitely more resilient than the average man or woman. They know the deepest truths of giving and sacrifice and the miraculous power of commitment and faith. They give of themselves, their time, their resources, and their sleep, reinvesting every dollar and mortgaging every property. They are more likely to find inspiration in a pink slip than in a promotion. Third, black millionaires are innovative and creative. They not only think outside of the box, they create their own box. Fourth, the black financial elite are grateful, incredibly grateful, for the blessings and good fortune that life has thrown their way. They tend to be goal setters committed to doing more than expected and giving more than required. Fifth, the black financial elite are always on a personal quest to learn something new, to absorb new information. Rather than focus on the next best thing, they are more apt to focus on what's now. However, most important, they approach life with a different mindset and a unique set of skills, especially regarding the seventh law of wealth. The story of S.B. Fuller provides an excellent example. From have-not to have. Wealth and self-development were S.B. Fuller's two most conspicuous qualities. They soon became a lifelong obsession. No one shared or believed in this concept and the spirit of enterprise more than Fuller. Born in Monroe, Louisiana, Fuller was always a picture of energy and full of plans, someone who was ahead of his time. Brought up in poverty and receiving only a sixth-grade education, he began to teach himself and bolster his professional development by reading such books as The Art of Selling and How to Win Friends and Influence People. In the early 1930s, Fuller sold insurance for the Commonwealth Burial Association, a black-owned firm, and soon he was supervising company employees. Through daily morning lectures to his sales staff, he honed a philosophy of self-help and financial independence. By the 1950s and 1960s, Fuller had built a multi-million-dollar conglomerate of businesses that boasted sales of more than $15 million a year and employed 5,000 sales representatives in 38 states. Fuller Products controlled 8 other corporations, including a Chicago-based department store, Fuller Philco Home Appliances, the Regal Theater, a real estate trust in New York, farming and cattle interests, and the Courier chain of newspapers serving black subscribers throughout the Midwest, New York, and Pittsburgh. Fuller's mother, who died when he was 17, had convinced her son that the best way out of poverty was through sales and entrepreneurship. As a result, Fuller hitchhiked to Chicago and tried his hands in sales, but felt confined. He knew he would no longer be trapped working for someone else. Acting on his own philosophy and in the teeth of the Depression, he launched his first enterprise with $25, the Fuller Products Company, buying soap wholesale and then selling it door to door. He later used these sales techniques to offer a briefcase full of items under a little-known line of cosmetics. In 1951, Fuller purchased a 7-story building in the heart of downtown Chicago, where he held incentive-laden sales conventions rewarding top producers for their efforts. In one case, the top earner received a Cadillac. In a September 1956 Businessman in the News profile, Fortune magazine noted that Fuller Products Company's gross sales reached $18 million. During this period, Fuller reportedly became the wealthiest black man in America. His business flourished, prompting him to further expand his own brand and auxiliary products, which were marketed across the country. He was the first African American to employ cross-country marketing. Speaking before the Baptist Convention in Chicago in the early 1960s, Fuller shared a snippet of the seventh law of wealth and urged blacks to collectively assume the responsibility for their own growth and development. The ultimate weapon in the fight against discrimination is self-help, he urged, and a refusal to remain dependent on others for your own sustenance. Dependence on others is no better than updated slavery. This rags to riches story should have made him a hero within the black community, and to some he was. That was until 1963, when at the request of the National Association of Manufacturers, Fuller, the organization's first black member, gave a keynote address in which he stated in part, "Whenever there are people, there is progress, and whenever there is progress, there are problems. The number one domestic problem in America today is the race problem. It is contrary to the laws of nature for man to stand still. He must move forward, or the eternal march of progress will force him backward. This the Negro has failed to understand. He believes that the lack of civil rights legislation and the lack of integration have kept him back. But this is not true. The lack of initiative, courage, integrity, loyalty, and wisdom are responsible for his not making the rate of progress that he should make. If the Negro had the amount of initiative, courage, and imagination required, he could control the retail selling in his own community. A lack of understanding of the capitalistic system and not racial barriers keep the Negro from making progress." Death of a salesman. Fuller's message to the manufacturers was not particularly new for him, but the level of coverage of his remarks were. Moreover, several days later, in an interview with U.S. News and World Report, Fuller elaborated, "The minute that Negroes can develop themselves so they excel in whatever they do, then they are going to find that they don't have many problems." Black leaders were incensed. His remarks touched off a firestorm of rage that, driven by the NAACP, would lead much of black America to boycott his products, thus destroying most of his fortune. But others pointed out that Fuller was not the first black leader to address these issues. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, and Marcus Garvey openly shared similar views at different times in history. The problem was that this topic was, and to this day, remains taboo. Some African Americans not only questioned the strategy, but wondered how bankrupting the Fuller Products Company would move the civil rights agenda forward. Here was a man who was confined by race as well as all aspects of building a business. Civil rights leaders had to be reminded that many of Fuller's problems were related to bias in the banking community. The normal channels of credit and investment open to his competitors were closed to Fuller. If it wasn't for Fuller and fellow black millionaires Arthur G. Gaston and T.M. Alexander, who provided much-needed financial support for a host of black causes, icons such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Medgar Evers would have spent more time in jail instead of leading their troops. It was Fuller, the budding entrepreneur who at one time could barely read or write, who rescued the influential black newspaper the New York Courier from bankruptcy, the same newspaper that played a key role in placing Jackie Robinson between the white lines in organized baseball. Unfortunately, the boycott had a profound effect. When the dust settled, Fuller's multi-million-dollar nest egg had shrunk to $300,000. I share this story not to force you to choose sides, take issue with a generations-old argument, or even cast blame, if blame is due. If I did, all those who listened to this audiobook would surely miss my point. No, The purpose of this brief profile is to highlight the internal mission of one individual whose goal in life was to ensure that all of God's children were given full access to the tools and principles that are beyond necessary for those who hold any hope of rising financially. Once each month, more than a half-century ago, like clockwork, Fuller would share his wisdom and business powers, labeled his Gospel of Success, with would-be entrepreneurs, power brokers, and corporate climbers alike. Those in attendance included Joe Dudley, Chief Executive Dudley Products; George Johnson, who would make his mark in the hair care field; Mary Ellen Shadd Strong, the future publisher of Black Family Magazine; Rick McGuire of Seaway Furniture Store Incorporated, who, as part of his marketing campaign, featured a sign in his store window stating, "A S.B. Fuller-inspired business"; Darrell Grisham, president of Parker House Sausage; John Lawson of the Dallas, Texas-based Lawson Cosmetics Company; Dr. T.R.M. Howard, president of the National Business League, as well as a young and impressionable John H. Johnson, who would listen to his mentor with rapt attention before returning home to hawk his mother's furniture in order to build his publishing empire. Each proudly professed to their mentor, "If there had been no you, there would have been no us." And Fuller's sales and promotion insight did not stop at the outer edges of the Black community. Far from it. His marketing, placement, and advertising principles, specifically among female customers, are still used to this day in Fortune 500 powerhouses such as Avon and Mary Kay. During these monthly meetings and pep talks, each of these people, and many others, would listen intently and constantly, probing their teacher for additional strategies and solutions. These millionaires in the making wanted to know what they had to do to live a seven-figure life. While thousands, if not millions, of African Americans judged Fuller, a man they had never met or encountered, on his remarks, he was a visionary, a difference maker who was committed to changing his life, as well as his community, all because he took this statement to heart. Poverty is not the enemy. The enemy is the man or woman who not only believes in his or her own helplessness, but actually worships it. And then he gave his charges a hint as to the seventh and final law of wealth. If we could save money as well as we save souls, many of our problems would be solved. Fuller's main message centered on individual freedom and personal responsibility. So why was there so much hostility toward this man who made such a difference in the lives of others? Perhaps that answer lay in his favorite quote written by his favorite philosopher, Plato. "Better be unborn than untaught, for ignorance is the root of misfortune." Seventh Law of Wealth. S.B. Fuller's advice regarding the discipline of saving cannot be overstated. As a citizen in this land of opportunity, nearly anyone who listens to this audiobook has and will earn enough money during his or her working life to be classified as wealthy. That's right, you read it correctly. Each of us will eventually earn enough money to live our days in endless comfort. Over our lifetimes, regardless of our education, you and I will more than likely earn more than $1 million in wages. So, why aren't more men and women within our community wealthy? Simple. The problem doesn't lie with how much we earn. Our problem rests squarely with the issue of what we do with our money once we earn it. My interview with one of Black America's entrepreneurial icons is indicative of how Black millionaires handle and view their money. T.M. Alexander's story is the American dream made manifest, a plot straight out of Horatio Alger. In 1931, during the bleakest days of the Great Depression, Alexander graduated from Morehouse College, finishing with honors. John Wesley Dobbs, grandfather of Atlanta's first Black mayor, Maynard Jackson, would tease, "I remember when he came out of Morehouse. Here was a Black man with a head full of dreams and a briefcase full of ambition." Getting started for T.M. was not easy, but success rarely is, he continued. Instruments do not become sharp on soap rock. It's difficulties that make men invincible. To help celebrate his accomplishment, an uncle surprised Alexander with $100, which he used to start the same business that he ran until the day he died. Alexander and Associates, one of our nation's oldest and most successful black-owned insurance companies. In those days, a black man in business was not only an entrepreneur but also an unwitting crusader. Often isolated and misunderstood, Alexander was a success by any definition, as he fought to preserve both space and dignity in a society that wielded racism and discrimination like a sledgehammer. When I started out, I peddled insurance like produce from door to door, often with little success. However, one time, I was able to gradually build up a loyal clientele, quietly and without fanfare. For nearly 70 years, Alexander, a millionaire several times over, could be found at the helm, still climbing and expanding by utilizing the same principle, the seventh law of wealth, which he shared throughout his life. One spring afternoon, Alexander and an associate took a leisurely stroll down Peachtree Street, the heart of Atlanta's bustling marketplace. The entrepreneurial stalwart and pillar of the black community made it his business to enter every shop along the way, stopping long enough to handle a piece of merchandise and commend the owner on his or her wares before moving on. After nearly 2 hours of witnessing this routine, his friend asked Alexander why he loved to frequent the market but never purchase a thing. "I am always amazed," the frugal chief executive replied, "to see just how much stuff I don't need. Every man is needy who spends more than he has. No man is needy who spends less. So what is the best way to build a fortune? Don't waste it." So many times we manage our monthly income in a manner that prevents us from appreciating the true level of wealth that we possess. We pay the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, as well as anyone else who finds us in the mood. So many people commit their total income and then some without retaining any portion for themselves. The problem is that we forget to make ourselves just as important as those who are competing for our hard-earned dollars. So few realize that regardless of what we do for a living, each of us can be financially independent by the time we reach age 65 if we only give a dime out of every dollar to the most overlooked person, ourselves, as well as that forgotten family, our own. As the noted author and intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois says, "We've given all of our economic power away. When you owe another, your freedom is impaired," Du Bois counseled. "Your ability to decide your destiny is tainted by the amount you owe." Why is saving so important? Several reasons come to mind. 1. Without a basic savings account, an emergency cushion, you might be continually stuck in a cycle of debt. 2. Saving is synonymous with peace of mind, greater options and power. The power to leave a dead-end job or bad relationship, or to avoid difficult circumstances altogether. 3. If you can't save, you cannot invest. And investing, whether in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, or commodities, or preferably some combination thereof, is the cornerstone of the seventh law of wealth. Saving and investing is the only way in which your income will not only keep pace with inflation and taxes, but multiply. Make thy money grow. The task of building wealth may be daunting, but it is not insurmountable. Once you understand how to hold on to your economic power in the form of spending, saving, and investing, your focus shifts. You no longer concern yourself with every nickel and dime, but rather with the financial strategies that have and will create substantial wealth. On the surface, this may not sound like hard financial advice, but it is true. If you desire to join the black financial elite, I suggest that you begin to shift your thinking. Rather than focusing on your lack of money, concentrate instead on your abundance of financial resources. As we discussed earlier, whatever we envision expands. I urge you to take hold of the seventh law. By mastering this principle of wealth conservation, you are satisfying a crucial prerequisite to all that you desire. I have traveled extensively and observed a variety of diverse cultures. I have watched those who resent the affluent and wealthy, as well as others who consider wealth's magical charms the be-all, end-all, final destination of life. T.D. Jakes tells us in The Great Investment, "I have experienced success and struggle, power and poverty. I have thrived and been thwarted by a fluctuating economy. I have lived on both sides of the track, and my shoes have walked down shantytown streets and sidewalks paved with gold. I know that hard work and determination can overcome humble beginnings, and that circumstances beyond our control can tumble fortunes like a house of cards. For some, success was handed to them as they were born into wealthy families and were given choices and opportunities denied to most. I have seen people go from wealth to gross poverty through one bad business decision, one prolonged illness, a lawsuit, a problem child. Success is fragile." Due in part to the 2009 recession, the following data highlight far too many disturbing trends with regard to the current state of black wealth. According to the Economic Policy Institute, as many as 40% of black households had a zero or negative net worth in 2009. Compared to their white counterparts, this economic gap has quadrupled in recent years. During this period, the median wealth of white households stood at $113,149, compared with less than $6,000 for African Americans. In 2010, the Insight Center for Community Economic Development released their report, Lifting as We Climb, Women of Color, Wealth and America's Future, which found that nearly one-half of single black women have zero or negative wealth, meaning their debts exceed their assets. 1/4 of single black women have no checking or savings account, and only 33% of single African American women are homeowners. In 2009, the National Foundation for Credit Counseling stated that 51% of African Americans admit they do not pay their bills on time, and 84% carry a monthly credit card balance. After peaking at 50% in 2006, African American home ownership dropped to nearly 44%. As of this writing, many blacks are at least 2 months behind on their mortgages, placing them at risk for foreclosure. Others are dealing with subprime loans they can no longer afford. It has been estimated that 1.1 million African Americans will lose their homes, the #1 generator of net worth and equity, by 2012. Not only are African Americans more likely to be unemployed and experience longer periods of joblessness, but as of March 2012, our country's black jobless rate remained at 13.6%, well above the 9% national average. According to a recent Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation report, more than half of black households use alternative financial services, including payday lenders, check cashing companies, or pawnbrokers. 1 out of 5 black households lack either a checking or savings account. Only 1 in 4 African Americans owns stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. Of the 1.4 million individuals who filed for bankruptcy in 2011, nearly 55% were African American. Part of all you earn is yours to keep. So what is the answer? How can you apply the life-changing 7th principle of wealth in your life, in your finances? Here is the single key that not only made these black millionaires wealthy beyond their wildest desires, but permitted them to hold on to the vast majority of their earnings. After all, the overwhelming majority did not create their millions overnight, nor did they find themselves on the threshold of a 7-figure income because someone died or bequeathed a check. In fact, nearly 9 out of 10 explained that their wealth developed over time. How can you use and practice this final law of wealth that continually allows the well-to-do to stand on solid financial ground? The power of this principle cannot be overstated. Remarkably, this final law of wealth can be traced back 6,000 years to ancient Babylonia. It was in this setting that Babylon, a city that was bordered by the Euphrates and Tigris rivers and was the capital of the Persian Gulf, became the wealthiest city of the ancient world because its citizens were the richest people of their time. They appreciated the value of money. They practiced sound financial principles in acquiring money, growing their income, and building their net worth. The financial accomplishments of those who lived in this region and time period would have been forgotten had it not been for the writings of a 20th century mapmaker. George S. Clason was the creator of a series of short stories, which he called the Babylonia Parables. In the stories, he described the success secrets of the ancients and how they handled their financial affairs. Read by millions, this timeless book, The Richest Man in Babylon, has been hailed as the greatest of all inspirational works on the subject of thrift and financial planning. In 1926, Clason, a successful Colorado businessman, began to explain the lost virtue of thriftness and the process of saving money to build wealth. He compiled his thoughts in pamphlets and distributed them through banks as well as the financial community. After the stock market crash in 1929 and the onset of the Great Depression, Clason's message had particular relevance as he sought to bring his financial advice to expanded readership. By 1930, he compiled his favorite stories in what would be the best-selling book, The Richest Man in Babylon, publishing the 144-page tome through a company bearing his name. The short, allegorical self-help reader struck a chord with Depression-era consumers who clamored for its easy-to-read financial advice and wisdom on wealth creation. Rather than writing in a dry business tone, Clason delivered his lessons through parables set in ancient Babylon. His promise was that today money is governed by the same laws that controlled it when prosperous individuals thronged the streets of Babylon 4,000 years before Christ. To this day, the book remains popular, gaining exposure as new generations of readers pick it up, learn from it, and apply the principles contained within. The secret to prosperity, the author pointed out, is to believe and practice this axiom. Part of all you earn is yours to keep. Learn to live on less than you make and save the balance for yourself. So what would you do to become a millionaire? Most people would reply with a variety of answers, some difficult and challenging. What if I mentioned that keeping track of your weekly or monthly expenses could and would add to your earnings? Would you do it? I would hope so, but the sad truth is that most people would not make this simple effort. With the addition of one important element, saving and investing, this is a fundamental strategy that the black financial elite practice on a daily basis. It is not enough to earn a decent living, or even living that is beyond decent. Black millionaires take their earnings and put them to work. It is no wonder their nest eggs continue to increase. Why? Because money goes where it is treated best. Patient investor. Searching for silver linings inside the derailed U.S. economy, they are out there for the brave and resilient. Just ask John Rogers, Jr., as seasoned investors have for more than 35 years. The stockbroker pioneer maintains that amid the ashes of the financial crisis of 2009 exists one of the greatest entrepreneurial environments in years for those determined to make their money grow. Once his father gave him shares of stock as a 12th birthday gift, IBM, Greyhound, General Motors, and American Can, John Rogers was hooked. By his senior year in high school, he hired his own broker, whose office he visited to read the ticker and pore over stock quotes in the Wall Street Journal. 4 years later, he became one of only a handful of his race gutsy and resilient enough to try his hand within this unsure and sometimes volatile industry. John Rogers, Jr. was born in 1958. His well-to-do family regularly discussed politics, money, and philosophy at the dinner table. Always an inquisitive student, Rogers graduated from the University of Chicago Laboratory School in 1976, the same year he was elected All-State by the Class A Illinois Basketball Committee. After graduation, he headed to Princeton, where he thrived in the classroom as well as on the basketball court. Rogers starred as guard for the legendary basketball coach Pete Carroll and the Princeton Tigers. His appetite already whetted with the endless possibilities of markets, earning yields, and profit margins, Rogers spent the next 4 years effectively dividing his time among economics, investments, and zone defenses. Even as his teammates discussed upcoming games and tournament hopes, Rogers could be found in the library soaking up the latest market figures or visiting a local brokerage office. During this time, he also latched on to value investing after reading Burton Malkiel's classic A Random Walk Down Wall Street. With an Ivy League degree in hand, Rogers landed a job as a stockbroker with William Blair and Company in Chicago. Besides being the first recruit hired straight out of college in more than 4 years, he was the first black professional to work at the 400-employee firm. For Rogers, Blair and Company was the ideal place to learn the business. It was a one-stop shop encompassing corporate and public finance, trading, money management, mutual funds, and research, and specializing in small-cap stocks. For the next 3 years, Rogers successfully guided clients in their investment transactions while continuing to refine his own growth strategies. Though his reputation soared, Rogers was determined to follow his own star. In 1983, he traded the comfort of working with a reputable firm and steady income for the non-stop high-stakes roller coaster world of running his own shop. He ventured out on his own and immediately turned to those who had initially piqued his interest: his parents. Based on the confidence of personal contacts and seed money from family and friends, Rogers launched his company, Ariel Capital Management, named after the African and Asian mountain gazelle. In his tiny downtown Chicago digs, John Rogers equipped himself with the basics: a phone line, a calculator that slammed out numbers with strings of zeros, a stack of business cards, and the morning edition of the Chicago Tribune. From this starting point, he single-mindedly viewed his world. Slow and steady wins the race. Rogers took on an associate and experienced 2 grueling years. Though business was promising, his parents' connections with would-be investors became increasingly more valuable. But eventually, even this revenue stream dried up. By the close of his 2nd year, Rogers was riding a dead horse. His total investment fund barely reached $400,000, which was hardly enough to pay the bills, and things got worse before getting better. Although the work was satisfying, Rogers's faith was put to the test. He toiled from sunup to sundown, Saturdays and Sundays included, grinding out dozens of scenarios and market calculations. The weekends included more paperwork, mass mailings of his investment newsletter, and non-stop phone calls searching for new portfolio entries as he sifted for new leads. With his client list dwindling, his dream of operating a successful management fund seemed to diminish with every passing day. Rogers was running out of cash fast and had no alternate plans. At the end of its first year, Ariel had $22,000 in revenue, barely enough to keep the lights on. Rogers desperately tried to hold his ground. Not only did I lack revenues, but I had no hope of accruing any revenues in the near future. It was tough keeping your composure when everything you worked so hard for begins to unravel. Rogers's breakthrough came in 1985 when he received a phone call from Howard University's endowment office. The predominantly black institution was searching for safe havens for its investment dollars and had discovered Rogers's outfit through a mutual friend. Understandably, the school was willing to invest only $100,000, a tiny slice of its pension fund, in his firm, making Rogers's reprieve bittersweet. He had hoped for more, but he was confident that his strategies would turn the collective heads of the school's development office. Toward this end, he deployed his game plan and invested Howard's portfolio in stocks with price-to-earnings ratios lower than that of the overall market. This strategy became a recurring theme. He also socked away a portion into small company stocks that were dramatically undervalued. The result? Howard's nest egg grew appreciably, catching the eye of hungry investors. Within 6 months, Rogers had raised an additional $190,000 in investment capital, and at that point, 1986, Ariel Capital moved as swiftly as its namesake, growing to $45 million in managed assets. Rogers quickly perfected a creative but conservative investment style best summed up by Ariel's motto borrowed from an Aesop's fable: "Slow and steady wins the race." Rogers's overriding philosophy is one of patience, timing, and making the most out of a down market. Warren Buffett has captured my attention for close to 30 years. I have read nearly every book and article about him as well as his investment strategy. Buffett's main principle, his circle of competence, never deviates. In other words, you only invest in products and companies that you understand. Period. By 2004, Ariel employed more than 70 analysts, researchers, and traders while managing nearly $17.5 billion in assets for an array of clients. Moreover, Rogers reached a personal goal. He created the first two U.S. mutual funds managed by African Americans. The Ariel and Ariel Appreciation Funds each received 4-star ratings. By his mid-40s, Black Enterprise magazine recognized him as a master wealth builder. Believe it or not, at 54, this trailblazing ahead of his time financial investor has seen it all. The booms and busts, the money rushing hungrily into stocks and then fleeing in fear. From the time his investment firm broke ground to the endless days when Rogers was forced to travel with hopes of convincing the endowed to divvy up parcels of their funds to smaller but no less capable black investors, skeptical whites and overly cautious blacks nearly ran him out of business. What turned Rogers's fortunes around? Obviously, the general easing of opportunities within the finance arena for minorities, not to mention burning gumption to succeed. However, his textbook approach, which pruned the recklessly speculative aspects of investing, was what won investors over. His ability to produce under fire, to employ cautiously aggressive growth strategies, and his immensely popular message, "Slow and steady wins the race," won the race for Rogers. And throughout that time, Rogers has never regretted that it was his name on the letterhead. However, what does concern Rogers is that more African Americans have yet to tap into the power of the market. Since 1998, Ariel has co-sponsored an annual study in conjunction with Charles Schwab that examines African American investing behavior. The latest research highlights the fact that African Americans are 35% less likely to invest than whites. Rogers is searching for ways to expose middle-class black Americans to the stock market, and no investor is too small or too young. His starting point is inner-city school children. Inspired by a symposium he attended on financial literacy, Rogers had Ariel team members with fellow Chicago investment firm John Nuveen & Company fund the innovative school program. Unlike similar academic programs, the Ariel Community Academy, with more than 300 students, offers a curriculum with a decidedly financial spin. The basics of investing, from selecting stocks to tracking leading economic indicators, are woven into the daily lesson plans in math and history classes. The Academy has been recognized for its above-average student retention rate and its 69% student participation in after-school programs. What's Rogers's motivation? I feel guilty that I was not there in the 1960s to march with Dr. King. A big part of his dream was economic empowerment. I haven't been forced to render that type of sacrifice in my life, but this is a start. 5 wealth-building strategies of the black financial elite. Most black millionaires subscribe to personal investment strategies that are customized for individual needs. As a part of this study, when respondents were asked, "Who or what is your single most reliable source for investment strategies?" more than 40% replied, "My broker." Nearly 25% said that diversifying their portfolio was the smartest money move they made. But over the course of his career, John Rogers removed much of the guesswork from investing by casting a sharp eye out for small stocks and adhering to his proven maxim. He has no use for market forecasts or economists' predictions, nor does he pay much attention to volatility. Instead, like his peer group, the proven pro focuses solely on 5 wealth-building strategies that will help you crack the millionaire code. Like a compass, these 5 rules will direct you to security and prosperity. Each rule points out what you want to know and what you need to know regarding your money. I suggest that you put these strategies into action and watch as they manifest in your life. Rule 1. The best investment will always be yourself. Master networker George Fraser shared a timely story about the life and spending habits of his cousin Bobby, who had recently died. Fraser wrote in part, "My cousin Bobby was buried in a designer suit, but he died broke. He made plenty of money using his boomer generation MBA to get good jobs at Ford Motor Company and later Honda in Marysville, Ohio. He loved automobiles. His gas-guzzling Jeep Cherokee was spotless, but hardly paid for. He had maxed out most of his 7 credit cards on designer clothes. Bobby was always as clean as his mama's chitlins. He was divorced and faithfully paying child support for his 2 beautiful children. His definition of community service was when the community was helping to serve his monthly sales quotas. Bobby had some good, honest side hustles, but he was always running on empty. His well-appointed 2-bedroom condo north of Columbus, Ohio, ate up nearly half his take-home pay. So his lifestyle meant he was good at robbing Peter to pay Paul. Bobby reminded me of the joke about the optimist who jumped from a 12-story building. As he passes the 3rd floor, he says, "So far, so good," not realizing that he's about to crash. He died of a heart attack at 54. At the reading of his 1-page will, there was little to distribute to his children. The creditors and IRS got most of it. He was house poor, car poor, and stuff poor. His children would have to start from scratch, just as he had. I thought if he only had treated his wealth with the same pride and support with which he treated his family and friends, he would have died rich. This forced me to reflect on 2 things. Were we living Dr. King's dream of economic development? Was I too suffering from economic illiteracy and a compulsive spending disorder driven by what many believe to be the United States' reckless marketing of easy credit and a mass media focus on materialism and instant gratification? Or was I driven by low self-esteem, the remnants of hundreds of years of oppression and denial producing a personal philosophy that dictates high social status is more important than financial freedom? Perhaps there is a little of both lurking below the surface of still too many successful African Americans who end up in debt and support every institution but their own. I imagine most families have at least one cousin Bobby. No family is immune. Unfortunately, we live in a consumer-driven society where, for some reason, shopping is a sport. We feel good, we buy. We feel bad, we buy. We rent when we should buy and buy when we should rent. We think in terms of jobs when we should think of careers. We are forever stuck on how much money we earn rather than how much money we are retaining, saving, and investing. We think credit when we should think cash. We think minimum payment instead of ending balance. We think tomorrow when we should think today. We think later when we should think now. And, most important, we look without when we should look within. Such is the ongoing dilemma of the have-nots. At last count, Tyra Banks' net worth was estimated at $90 million, but her personal finances were not always this rosy. While Banks doesn't feel the need to own the latest designer this or that, her wardrobe, which features form-fitting low-cut dresses on the air and jeans in the office, generally fits the budget and tastes of her audience. As she has stated on numerous occasions, I grew up wearing a uniform to school, and if my stylist did not create my outfits to wear on camera, I would never get dressed. I'm frugal, Banks continued. I have always been this way. When I was young, my mother would give me my allowance, and I would peel off a little each week with the aim of saving a little for that rainy day. A penny saved is a penny earned is more than a proverb. It is a value I look for in others. When interviewing potential candidates to handle the financials for my company, I make it my business to ask a question or 2 regarding their personal spending habits. Why? Because how you spend money reveals a lot about you. Richard Parsons' road to a $100 million fortune began nearly 60 years ago in his Brooklyn, New York home. It was there that the Citigroup chair and former Time Warner chief executive learned the power of the 7th law of wealth. He watched in earnest as his mother, a homemaker, and his father, an electrical worker, sat twice a month at the kitchen table to allocate and prioritize his father's paycheck. With pad and pencil, Parsons recalled in an interview, he would pay his mortgage before buying food and necessities. Next, he would place aside a modest sum specifically for savings. Our family would then live on whatever was left. Whatever money was left went toward educating Parsons and his 4 siblings, sending the former to Washington, D.C. to be a direct report to the Vice President Nelson Rockefeller before Parsons took the helm of Time Warner, the largest media and entertainment conglomerate in the world. As a society, we must learn to rely less and less on credit and borrowing, he advises. The ability to borrow is like dynamite. It must be handled with care. That is a lesson each of us should learn. Just because we can qualify for credit does not mean we should. On every hand, says Kirby John Caldwell, pastor of the Houston, Texas-based Windsor Village, we see signs advertising no money down, or no credit check required, or unemployed, no problem. With each catchy scheme comes offers of cars, clothing, furniture, and appliances, all promising easy payments. As I preach to my congregation every Sunday, when it comes to staying afloat financially and living within your means, there is nothing easy about easy payments. And who would know better than this one-time Wharton-trained fast-track bondbroker? Though Caldwell grew up in a middle-class home, his neighborhood was adjacent to Kashmere Gardens, one of Houston's tougher areas. After graduating from high school, Caldwell left the Lone Star State to attend Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, where he earned an undergraduate degree in economics before measuring himself against the best and brightest finance students at the University of Pennsylvania. With an MBA in hand, he was gobbled up by First Boston, a Wall Street investment bank, and eventually returned to Texas to join a Houston-based bond firm. Never one to regret any decision, at age 25, Caldwell listened to his heart and opted out of investment banking to enter the ministry. The result? What his congregation has come to know as the Gospel of Good Success, a 16,000-member, 120-ministry, $14.5 million megachurch. Though many still seek his insight regarding investments and the stock market, Caldwell is crystal clear as to where people should invest first. On themselves, he replied. Rule 2. Managing your finances is your responsibility. In the discipline of sound money management, the unit measure of prosperity always begins with the smallest coin. As a result, millionaireship is measured not by the pound but by the penny, not by the dollar but by the cent. To hear the reserved and shy Dr. Roosevelt Peebles describe his most routine procedures would literally cause anyone to pause. This Nashville, Tennessee-based board-certified plastic, facial, and reconstructive surgeon boasts a wealth of knowledge not only about beauty and form, but about function as well. Changing the lives of his patients for the better has become his magnificent obsession. Like Dr. Maxwell Maltz, the famed plastic surgeon who stated years ago, "The incisions I make run more than skin deep. They frequently cut into the psyche as well. By correcting a perceived flaw here or removing an aggravating blemish there, Dr. Peebles' skilled hands have been known to enhance the appearance of his clientele, giving all who walk through his doors a sense of well-being as well as improved self-confidence and self-esteem. But regardless of how much he loves his work, at 54 years of age and working in a field that demands precision, Dr. Peebles is the first to admit that retirement looms just around the corner. No rational physician could ever believe that he or she could last forever within this highly specialized field. Personally, saving and investing for the future is not only a worthwhile endeavor, but a necessity. I've never been one to live an ostentatious life. Though it would be easy to do so, conspicuous consumption does not hold my interest. Living beneath my means and saving at a minimum 30% of my earnings is my path to building lasting wealth. It is impossible to map out a route to your new financial destination, in this case to join the ranks of the affluent men and women profiled within this audiobook, if you don't know your point of origin. With that in mind, it would be wise to open every single financial statement, bank, credit card, mortgage, 401k, brokerage account, and gauge where you are. Only when these documents lie before you can you set priorities and calculate what to do next, and it's always a good idea to secure the services of a qualified professional to take an independent look at your overall financial picture. Living in the past will not create your future. Trish Milanez DeZico was a gifted, geeky 13-year-old who excelled at math and enjoyed operating the school film projector when she suddenly informed her mother that she saw no use for college. Her mother was 50 years older than her only child and had spent much of her life working as a maid in hotels and for wealthy families in the small New Jersey beach town of Belmar. As a single parent, she bought her own home, a small bungalow, by working 51 weeks a year and saving the cab fare and lunch money her employers provided. Though she never said a word about her daughter's decision, she moved decisively. That summer, Trish accompanied her mother 5 days a week scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets as she made her rounds. The point was made. A few months after her mother died of cancer, Trish enrolled in New Jersey's Monmouth College. Originally an electrical engineering major, she switched to computer science. It was love at first sight. Here was a black woman who excelled at circuitry and deductive and inductive logic. It wasn't long before a handful of high-tech giants came calling, specifically Microsoft Corporation. In 1988, Milanez DeZico began working at Microsoft in its Technical Systems division. Although she was the only team member of her race and gender, she felt at home. From a pool of 200 majority white computer wizards, she was elected as the company's first black female program manager. I share this story with you not to highlight the technical exploits, career advancement, or one corporate climber's rise through the ranks. It is obvious that the circumstances surrounding Milanez DeZico's childhood might have discouraged a lesser man or woman from pursuing his or her goals. Nor does her example expand the ever-growing need for people of color and corporate America to work together to bridge the digital divide. Clearly, what is on display is the one quality greater than wealth, the one trait that will confer prosperity on all those who seek it. To the average person, there is, was, and always will be another, more pressing need for your money than putting it away to grow for the future. There will be the car you want to buy, the house you want to renovate, and the vacation you want to enjoy. And because each option will arrive far sooner than retirement, they will appear much more enticing than a routine deposit into a 401k or an IRA. Many who know Milanez DeZico's story have called her lucky, and because of her instant success, some say she is a financial genius. But whatever the reasons of her accomplishments, the seventh law of wealth, the ability to save and max out a 401k, certainly played a major part in her success. 9 years after working for the highly touted blue-chip software firm, Milanez DeZico earned so much money from company stock that, at age 39, she walked away and retired a Microsoft millionaire. Regarding retirement and investing, what is her course of action? Never take advice from someone who is not where you want to be in life, she counsels. Remember, if you buy someone else's opinion, you buy their financial support. Rule 3. Get your spending under control. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a problem. The voice barking out this admonition belongs to one of America's 5 black billionaires. But his story does not begin or end here. The purpose of sharing this brief passage is not to discuss the challenges of wealth creation with regard to the black community, nor is it to point blame or single out those who constantly struggle to attain wealth. No, this anecdote runs far deeper than a few paragraphs. As Bob Johnson walked from his table to position himself behind a microphone, a throng of reporters and attendees detailed his every move. Despite the lighthearted atmosphere eased by cocktails and finger food, the billionaire businessman could not hide his emotions. And then he not only made his point, but clarified the finite effects of this ubiquitous seventh law. I want to deal with an issue that should be on everybody's mind, he said to a packed room of chief executives, entrepreneurs, and wealth creators at a Washington, D.C. focus group. Most of you know me as the proud owner of the Charlotte Bobcats, one of 30 NBA teams. What you probably don't know is that each team fills a roster of 13 to 15 players who earn, on average, $5 million over a 3-year period. Furthermore, in terms of race and ethnicity, each team, mine included, is nearly 80% black. So you do the math. Economically speaking, and to the surprise of no one, the NBA boasts the wealthiest and most powerful group of black males in the world. That's the good news. The bad news revolves around the disturbing fact that no one knows how these players save or invest their money. This game is not about bling bling or diamond-studded earrings. It's about using your influence. It's about making a difference and saving and investing your resources wisely. I admonish you to get your spending under control. Does the dreaded B-word budget make you cringe? It really shouldn't. Not when you realize that developing a budget and sticking to it offers a host of wealth-bearing benefits. A budget aids your monthly cash flow, prevents overspending, and helps you avoid living paycheck to paycheck. The economy is within you, and here lies your first step. The difference between wealth and poverty, or between have versus have not, is nearly as great as most people believe. Your current thinking ultimately affects your future economic condition. Again, I suggest that you take the road less traveled. Quick question. How many credit cards do you own? Count the number of credit cards, excluding debit cards, in your wallet. If you carry more than one, then you are, in all likelihood, overspending and incurring debt. Make this the year that you finally retire credit card debt. Whatever occurs in the stock market or the housing market is completely beyond your control. Credit card debt, however, is completely under your control. Each time you pay off a credit card with a 15% interest rate, you earn a 15% return on your money. And yes, it is important that you carry some cash. Studies reveal that when consumers use credit versus cash, they spend 12 to 18% more. Arguably, the most influential black entrepreneur of the 20th century was Arthur G. Gaston, the Birmingham, Alabama native who took his life savings, $500, and transformed it into a net worth of more than $40 million. Vision and a legendary work ethic played a part in Gaston's amassing such a huge financial portfolio, but these qualities paled in comparison to the root cause of all that he was to achieve. Nearly 30 years ago, I sat at his feet seeking his wisdom and keys to success. "Pay as you go and keep a handle on unnecessary expenses," he said to me during an interview without blinking an eye. Even the Almighty, it has been written, cannot afford to be extravagant. When he increased the loaves and fishes, he commanded the disciples to gather up the fragments that nothing be lost. By any measurement, Sheila C. Johnson, the chief executive of Salamander Hotels and Resorts, a sprawling 165-acre luxury compound nestled in the horse country of Northern Virginia, is rich. The ex-wife of Black Entertainment Television founder Robert Johnson, she now presides over her own expansive empire. Johnson is the first African-American woman to own a stake in 3 professional sports teams. She is president and managing partner of the WNBA's Washington Mystics, the National Hockey League's Washington Capitals, and the NBA's Washington Wizards, and her net worth has been estimated at $400 million. But don't let that fool you. As you stroll the grounds of her home, what is obviously missing amid the guest cottages and horse stables is opulence and bling. Her lifestyle is understated. An excellent example, she has been known to urge her players to be smart about their financial future too. As she and a reporter toured her grounds, Johnson summed up her thrifty mindset. "There are a lot of black folks with money. I just handle mine differently. I'm not in your face money." Johnson's fiscal approach is so simple and yet so difficult for many people to comprehend. As of this writing, U.S. credit card debt rests at an all-time high, more than $60 billion. The average family owes more than $8,000. While black millionaires are apt to take a credit risk on their business for strategic reasons, they are highly unlikely to take a risk in their personal spending. In closing, remember the point about a fool and his money? Like Cousin Bobby, most people spend their surplus assets on the appearance of wealth. fine clothes, fancy cars, jewelry, and lavish vacations. Ironically, the wealthy can spot a dead giveaway in an instant. Again, as previously stated, one member of this study told me that if someone looks wealthy, the odds are he or she isn't. This outlook was underscored by A10 Clinical Solutions' Leah Brown, who stated, "I choose not to spend $500 on a Gucci bag. Why should I brand someone else's company when I can brand my own? As a community, we will not build lasting wealth utilizing these kinds of business practices. Being poor does not help those behind you. Poverty only perpetuates poverty." Rule 4. Pay for yourself first. Saving is permissible. For the first decade of Victor McFarland's life, his mother's living room couch also served as his bed. The product of a single-parent home, McFarland sought neither sympathy nor pity. That was not his nature. Nearly 50 years later, when asked for his proudest accomplishment, he didn't cite the 80-story Time Warner Center in New York that his real estate company helped to build, nor did he mention the countless urban revitalization areas that he transformed along the West Coast as well as the Eastern Seaboard. Oddly, he didn't even acknowledge the $4 billion in real estate and private equity funds that McFarland Partners currently manages. History clearly states that Victor McFarland created the first urban investment fund in 1990. What he did bring to my attention was that it was in that one-bedroom Middletown, Ohio home where he ultimately decided that poverty would not be given a place in his life. This resolve has helped him amass a varied and valuable real estate portfolio, including inner-city housing and commercial space, high-end condo developments, and planned communities. His company's diversification helps it to thrive even in the slow markets of the past few years, consistently generating returns of 20% or more. McFarland is quick to point out that in this game, capital is king. But he is equally as quick to admit that all fortunes have their foundation in the first great principle of wealth building, saving. He then began to share his 4 rules for prosperity. First, establish a budget and live within it. He explained during an interview. Live within your means. If you are not careful, any amount of money can be spent, whether you earn $70,000 a year or $70 million. Second, create and adhere to a savings plan. Each of us needs some amount of liquidity. To capitalize on opportunity, I always keep some amount of cash on hand. Third, separate your needs from wants. The vice of our age is the desire to keep up with the Joneses, to outshine our neighbor. It's time to let your neighbor go. Trust me, this negative habit is the bedrock of poverty. And 4, diversify your funds. It is wise to participate in a variety of assets. When it comes to saving and investing for your future, the historic rule of thumb is 10%. By saving 10% of your income each month, you will grow wealthier than you dreamed possible. In some cases, it is necessary to save more, particularly if you have ambitious retirement goals. But now is the time to adopt the rule that so many of the financial elite apply. Begin by acting on the wisdom that 10% of all that you earn is yours to keep. After a celebrated career with the Milwaukee Bucks and Los Angeles Clippers, Junior Bridgman, a former NBA standout, shared the following story with a fresh group of retired professional athletes. One day, while Bridgman was working the line at a Wendy's fast food restaurant in Milwaukee, a woman approached the counter to place an order, acting as if she might have recognized the one-time 6'5" point guard. Once she left the store, Bridgman didn't give the matter a second thought until the following morning when he heard the comments of a caller on a local radio talk show. "I think it is a shame," the caller explained. "I was eating at a Wendy's yesterday and I saw Junior Bridgman working behind the counter. Oh my God, is that the best these ex-athletes can do?" As Bridgman concluded his remarks, a few of the athletes in attendance shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And why not? In an age of in-your-face ballers, high-priced pleasure seekers armed with an inflated self-worth and egos, and extravagant spending habits to match, It is pretty easy to visualize the reaction of today's pampered NBA stars, but not Bridgman. He is a throwback. He just smiled. Perhaps it is because the last laugh was his. Unlike so many of his ex-teammates, he refused to squander his earnings. Instead, he saved every dime and purchased a string of fast food franchises. In 1987, the year he retired. Ironically, he owned that particular Wendy's plus 160 others, not to mention 121 Chili's restaurants. Today, Bridgman Foods is number 3 on the Restaurant Finance Monitor's top 200 franchise-owned companies, surpassing the $530 million mark in revenue. When asked how he got his start, the former swingman replied, "It all began with my first paycheck, really the first dime I earned. I knew that saving something was better than saving nothing. If you are careless with your nickels and dimes, fortune will never come by your hand. However easy it may be to make money, it is far more difficult to keep it." Rule 5. Make your money work as hard as you do. Across every aspect of the data, among Black America's wealthy, I found these statistics. 40% save 10 to 20% of their gross incomes, and nearly 75% have invested $100,000 or more in specific retirement accounts. Furthermore, the well-to-do don't like being in debt. When asked, not including your mortgage, how much do you owe, 1/2 of respondents replied, less than $10,000. Millionaireship begins with savings, with foregone consumption, which appears, from a sufficient distance, the same as poverty. The chief desire of the millionaires in this study is not money to waste on depreciating extravagances, but the freedom and power to expand their entrepreneurial ideas. And forget about keeping up with the Joneses. The Black financial elite would rather identify the Joneses' strengths and work with them to uncover how they can leverage their own talents and skills in order to make smarter financial decisions. For the wealthy, earning, spending, and saving money is serious business. Very serious business. It is by the mysterious power of saving and investing that the loaf is multiplied, that little becomes much, and that out of nothing comes the miracle of saving. In Chapter 6, you listened to the daring mission of Colleen Payne Neighbors to launch her enterprise. It is true that those who will pay the price of victory never need to fear final defeat. But truer still is the fact that the real secret to her success rests squarely on the 7th law. Why? Because investing is second nature to this savvy entrepreneur. As a freshly minted college graduate, she joined her employer's 401k plan without hesitation. To further augment her earnings, at age 25, Payne Neighbors began purchasing Treasury EE savings bonds. Every 2 weeks, her bank automatically deducted $50 from her paycheck to purchase the bonds. 7 years later, when she was ready to buy her first house, she cashed in those checks to make a $12,000 down payment. And you guessed it, roughly 5 years later, when her rural Oklahoma town grew too small for her dreams, it was the equity in her home that served as a leverage to her shaky startup when area bankers were non-committal. As I wrote this chapter, the stock market stood at its most volatile point in decades. Stocks were up hundreds of points, if not thousands, one week and down thousands the next. The world is still sorting out this financial mess, both in the United States and abroad. In the near term, unemployment barely remains stable. Business activity is moderate at best, and in some sectors, the economic headlines continue to be scary. Clearly, the novice investor needs the most basic information regarding investing and who can afford to do so, John Rogers points out. Before you figure out how to invest, you must decide if you should be investing at all. If you are going to invest on your own, invest in those companies you know and understand. I include these words here because they echo an important finding in the wealth choice data. The wealthy buy stocks. In order to generate multiple streams of income and diversify your portfolio, saving by itself is not enough. Unfortunately, The slim returns you might generate through a money market account or certificate of deposit will barely keep pace with inflation and taxes, let alone exceed them. New rules of money. Saving money translates into saving the individual. Ask the majority of men and women who have built seven-figure bank accounts to what they owe their wealth or fortune. They will tell you that their financial success is not only the fruit of struggle, but the fruit of habit, that they acquired their best quality when only a child, that they exercised the only discipline that would lead them out of bondage, never to see the likes of poverty again. I do not believe that anyone can truly be happy until he or she expresses that which the Creator has made to dominate in his or her life. Until the person has given vent to the grand passion that speaks loudest in his or her life, until he or she has made best use of that gift which was intended to take precedence over all other powers. No person can live a full life while bound in any part of his or her nature. Saving and investing enables men and women to lift their heads above the crowd, to be independent, self-reliant, and shielded from debt and anxiety, that frightful obligation and emotion that destroys homes, ruins marriages, wrinkles the smoothest face, and stifles peace of mind. Thrift and saving place hope into the heart and raise self-esteem. There is an impressive fact in the gospel story of the prodigal son. The statement, "He wasted his substance in riotous living," means more than that he wasted his funds. Rather, it implies that he wasted himself. And the most serious offense of all waste is not the waste of substance, but the waste of self, of your energy, capital, the lowering of morals, the gradual loss of character and self-respect that thrift encourages and promotes. The best form of insurance against poverty and failure, saving and investing, means a warm home and healthy children, a restful vacation and a college education, a secure retirement and help for the needy. In short, the saving of money translates into the saving of the individual. I suggest that you begin now to adhere to the seventh law of wealth and make your money grow. Millionaire Lesson Number 8. As I preach to my congregation every Sunday when it comes to staying afloat financially and living within your means, there is nothing easy about easy payments. Learn to say the words, "I can't afford it." Kirby John Caldwell.